Hello again. In this third section of this week's presentation, having just gone through some of the principal theoretical perspectives in sociology, I want to talk about something called social ontology. And I understand that a word like ontology seems a bit strange and a bit confusing. I think that we can make it clear and we can talk fundamentally about the two main types of ontology and sociology and why they're important. But let's begin by tackling this word, ontology. Now, in philosophy, they define ontology as being the science of being. That is, answers to the question of what exists and what doesn't exist. Social ontology is a bit narrower than that. So we use this word, ontology, that we've borrowed from philosophy, but I think that very little of what happens in sociology would be recognizable as ontology to a practicing philosopher. What we're really asking is about the status of different facts in the social world, okay? You've got a little quotation here, and look, what a lot of it comes down to is people asking the question of whether the thing that is being talked about is real or not. I think not in a philosophical sense, but in a sense that is narrower and more practical. That is, whether things are changeable, whether they have been given by nature or whether they have been created through the construction of meaning by human beings. Let's try to introduce some categories to make that a little bit more systematic. Okay, the first category, set of categories that I want to offer to you is the category between objective and subjective understandings of reality. Now, the objective approach says that every fact in the world exists objectively. That is, it is a part of the world. It comes to us from nature, or if you are religious, from a divine force. Something like this. So it takes social facts and interprets them as being immutable, unchangeable, as a part of the world that is given. The other approach, the subjective approach, is one that says, well, facts exist at least in part because of ways in which people have constructed them and people have constructed their meaning. It's one of the reasons why people looking at facts as being objective tend to be described as essentialists, right? People saying there is something essential about the facts. People looking at them as being subjective tend to be categorized as constructionists. People saying that that facts are constructed. I think this makes a little bit more sense when we try to apply these categories to some specific social facts. So, for example, this is an example that we'll talk about in our next session when we talk about ideology. The idea of human nature. All of us are living, at least for the moment, in these capitalist societies, and one of the fundamental presuppositions of capitalism that justifies it is that people have a certain nature. They are greedy, they are self-seeking, they are competitive, and so on. Now, an essentialist would say this has always been the case with humans, and then presumably this would legitimate the system by saying that it's a system that corresponds to this understanding of human nature. A constructionist would say there are lots of variations in terms of what human nature can be, just as we all know humans with different types of characters, but there are some social structures and social practices that encourage one over another, and so what you're seeing as the definition of human nature is in fact a construction of human nature that is encouraged by a particular set of conditions. I hope that illustration has made sense, but I'm going to try to run you through a few more. So first, let's take a look at the essentialist perspective. The essentialist perspective says that things have truth by themselves. They have some kind of essential truth, and the truth about them resides in the things themselves as objects, and they are fixed. They don't change. They are always the same and are transhistoric. That is, in different historical periods, they're always the same, and there's no variation among individual objects. They all contain this sort of objective truth. This is a perspective that is characteristic and is probably indispensable in a lot of the natural sciences. So the observation that water is wet. It always has this characteristic. I know some of you will say that it is not wet at different temperatures, but we'll put that aside for now. But that means that no matter in what environment or what historical period you're in, you will always treat water the same way. When this is applied to the social world, it means that you look at facts like gender or facts like political behavior, like water, that they're always the same and they can always be looked at objectively. Now look, a lot of people dismiss essentialism. They say that it's a narrow or a shallow understanding of social facts, and some of this critique is valid. You could say it's generally valid, but I would also say that most of the time we would probably find it impossible to function in the social world if we did not make some essentialist assumptions, even if we know that these assumptions are wrong. Let's contrast this with some constructivist ontology. Constructionist ontology looks at social practices, at ideas, at institutions as being invented by particular cultures and invented by particular societies. That is to say that they are contingent. They're contingent on history and they are contingent on culture. If the word contingent is confusing, what it means practically is that it depends on them and that they will look different in different contexts. So the important thing for a constructivist is not the fact about the thing itself, but the cultural context and the historical context in which you observe the fact. And different facts will have different meanings under different conditions. So in this sense, I think well, let me first give you a distinction that operates within constructivism. It is, one is a constructivist approach that we could call constructionist, that is very close to the social interaction perspective that we talked about in the last section of this week's discussion. Is it sees the meaning of objects as developing out of communication and exchange, so out of the social process. But there is also in constructivism this subjectivist view, the idea that meanings can be imposed and that they function as long as the imposition of this meaning is successful. Now, why does any of this matter? Again, think about applying these different categories to specific social facts. So here we have examples of some essentialist and some constructionist approaches to the social fact of gender. And on the first two pictures you have here are covers of popular books. They're books that you may have seen or run across and possibly read. These are essentialist understandings of gender. That is, they want to say there are these two gender groups, men and women. They have fundamentally different ways of thinking and understanding things and communicating with one another and across gender lines. And this is what makes relations between members of different gender groups often problematic. These books are advice books saying, well, here is a way that if you're a member of one of the genders, you can talk to a member of one of the other genders and still try to understand one another if you understand how they're fundamentally different, right? Think of it as kind of a dictionary if different genders have different languages. On the other side, and here you've got Simone de Beauvoir saying, well, no, the differences between gender groups are not essential. They're not given by nature. They are things that people learn and are reinforced by practice, so that you are not born with a particular identity or a particular gender. You become a member of this particular group by learning and by observation. So the argument there is not that, I do like that title, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And what the constructivists will be arguing is that neither one is from Mars or from Venus. Mars and Venus are categories of difference that we use as a kind of illustration. They're both from here, and learn to identify with one or another planet, or one or another planet is rising for them, depending on the conditions in which they live. And this is if you're able to understand simply this distinction in ontology, the distinction between an essentialist and a constructionist view of reality and of meaning, then you've understood the most important point about social ontology.